Emily Thompson had just turned 14. She was a bright, optimistic young girl with dreams larger than life. Known for her passion for singing and a radiant smile that could light up any room, she had the potential to go far. Emily had recently moved to a small, quiet, suburban town with her mother, Lisa, and younger brother, Zach, after her parents decided to separate. They had decided to leave their old city life behind, hoping to start fresh. Her father, who lived in a different state, was still in touch with her occasionally. They had their ups and downs, but Emily remained optimistic that one day they would all be a family again. Life in the small town seemed perfect for her. The neighborhood was calm, the schools were good, and there were plenty of parks to explore. Emily had always loved music. It was her escape, her passion. She would spend hours practicing her songs in the privacy of her room, posting videos on social media for her small but loyal group of followers. She dreamed of becoming a famous singer one day. It was a dream that motivated her, and she often imagined herself on stage, performing in front of thousands of people, her voice soaring through the air. Her mother, Lisa, was her biggest supporter. Lisa always encouraged her to pursue her dreams. She would listen to Emily practice and even filmed some of her performances to share with friends. Lisa knew Emily had something special, and she believed one day the world would know her name. Zach, though younger than Emily, adored his sister. He would often join her during her rehearsals, singing along to her favorite songs or playing the guitar. The family had settled into their new life in the town, and Emily quickly became popular among her new classmates. Her classmates were drawn to her friendly nature, her love for music, and her willingness to help others. Emily quickly became known for her talent and kindness. She was active in school activities, joining the choir, and volunteering for various events. But even as she blossomed in her new environment, she was unaware of the danger that was silently creeping into her life. Just across the street from Emily's house lived a man named Mark Lawson. Mark was in his early 40s and had lived in the neighborhood for many years. He was a quiet man who kept to himself, known for his reclusive nature. Mark worked as a mechanic, but his business had recently suffered a significant downturn. He had been struggling financially, and his isolation only seemed to deepen. Mark had been married once, but his wife had left him years ago, taking their child with her. Since then, he had been alone, living in the same house he had once shared with his family. He kept to himself, rarely engaging with the neighbors, and his life seemed to revolve around his work and his solitude. But something about Emily caught his attention. He first noticed her while she was playing in the yard, practicing one of her songs. Mark, who had no children of his own, was intrigued by Emily's energy and the way she seemed to shine with enthusiasm. He started watching her more frequently, drawn to the innocence and vibrancy she seemed to embody. Emily was unaware that she had caught his attention. At first, it seemed harmless, a neighbor occasionally looking out the window, admiring a young girl's talent. But Mark's interest was beginning to grow into something more, something darker. Mark began to make small gestures toward Emily and her family, trying to appear friendly. He would wave when he saw her outside and even offered to help with small repairs around the house, like fixing a broken fence or checking the car. Emily, always polite, smiled and thanked him for his kindness. She didn't think much of it. After all, he was just a neighbor, and everyone in the town seemed friendly. But soon, these seemingly innocent gestures began to take on a different tone. Mark started to show up more often when Emily was out. If she went to the park with friends, he was there, sitting in his car nearby. If she walked to the bus stop in the morning, he would drive by, giving a slow, steady glance in her direction. He would smile, but there was something off about the way he looked at her. It sent a chill down Emily's spine, though she couldn't pinpoint why. At first, Emily brushed it off. Maybe he was just a lonely man, she thought. Maybe he enjoyed watching kids play, or maybe he just had nothing better to do. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about Mark's attention. The way he would always seem to appear at the right time, always watching her from a distance. She began to feel uncomfortable, but wasn't sure how to express her concerns. After all, he hadn't done anything outright wrong, right? Mark's behavior was growing more obsessive. Emily, who had always felt safe in her new neighborhood, was now constantly aware of his presence. It wasn't just his occasional sightings anymore. He started to follow her more closely. If she went for a run in the evening, he was there, walking behind her at a distance. If she was talking to friends at the park, he would suddenly appear, offering to buy snacks or chat with her for a moment. Emily started to feel uneasy, especially when he would linger just a little too long. At first, she thought maybe she was overreacting, but when she saw him parked outside her school one afternoon, watching her through the window, she felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. Why was he always around? Her friends, who had also noticed Mark's strange behavior, began to warn her. "Emily, be careful. He's acting kind of creepy," one of her friends, Rachel, said one afternoon after seeing Mark staring at Emily through the window. Emily didn't know what to do. She didn't want to cause trouble or seem paranoid, but there was something about Mark that made her feel like she wasn't safe. She didn't know if he was just lonely or if something more sinister was going on. Despite the growing discomfort, Emily continued to go about her life. She had a talent show to prepare for, and her dreams of becoming a singer were getting closer. She poured her energy into her music, practicing every day after school. She had a few more followers on social media now, and it felt like everything was falling into place. Little did Emily know, Mark's fixation on her was about to take a dangerous turn. His obsession had become all-consuming, and he was no longer content with just watching from a distance. He wanted more. He wanted to bring her into his world where he could control her, where she could be his. It was November 18th, 2014. Emily had spent the afternoon practicing for the talent show. Her mother, Lisa, had been busy with work, and Zach had gone to play with some friends at a nearby park. Emily had walked to the rehearsal that afternoon, excited to perform a new song she had written. It was a big moment for her, and she couldn't wait for the performance. When she left, she promised her mother she would be back by 5 p.m. But as the hours passed and the sun began to set, Lisa became concerned. Emily was never late, especially when she had something important to prepare for. Lisa tried calling her daughter's phone several times, but there was no answer. She thought maybe Emily was just caught up in rehearsals, but when 7 p.m. came around and Emily still hadn't returned, Lisa began to panic. By 8 p.m., Lisa called the police. Something was wrong. Emily had never gone missing before. Lisa couldn't imagine what could have happened. The town was safe, and Emily was always cautious. She never would have run off without telling anyone. The police started to investigate, but there were no clues to suggest where Emily had gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The search for Emily began immediately. The entire town rallied together, posting flyers, searching local parks, neighborhoods, and the woods that bordered the town. Lisa, beside herself with worry, couldn't believe that her daughter had just vanished. She clung to the hope that Emily might have simply gotten lost or caught up in something. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. The police conducted interviews with Emily's friends, teachers, and neighbors, but there were no leads. No one had seen or heard anything suspicious. Mark, who had barely spoken a word to anyone since Emily's disappearance, was initially questioned, but maintained that he had not seen anything unusual that day. He appeared to be completely uninvolved in the investigation, but his behavior, though subtle, seemed to change. He no longer made small talk with the neighbors, and he stopped his usual watchful presence. The search went on for days. Emily's mother couldn't sleep or eat, consumed by an unbearable sense of guilt. She wished she had done something, anything, to prevent this. She replayed every moment leading up to Emily's disappearance, wondering if she had missed a sign, an indication that something was wrong. But nothing stood out. The days were dragging on, and with every passing hour, Lisa's hope of finding her daughter alive grew smaller. Meanwhile, the townspeople began to murmur. Some were convinced that Emily had run away, that she had left on her own for reasons no one understood. Others whispered about strange happenings in the town, claiming they had heard rumors of a man who had been watching children. But nothing concrete ever came forward. Mark Lawson, with his reclusive ways, remained under suspicion, but without any evidence, the investigation stalled. Lisa's search for answers led her to speak with the neighbors more frequently, but one conversation stood out. A neighbor, who had always kept to herself, pulled Lisa aside one evening. She had noticed Mark's behavior for a long time and said something that made Lisa's blood run cold. "I saw him," the neighbor whispered, "a few days before Emily disappeared. He was in his garage, doing something strange, like he was fixing something. He looked up, and he saw me. And then he just froze. It was like he knew I saw something." Lisa's heart raced as she listened. The neighbor described seeing Mark carrying what appeared to be a large duffel bag into his garage late at night. At the time, the neighbor hadn't thought much of it, but now, hearing this, Lisa's instincts screamed that it was connected to Emily's disappearance. Determined to get answers, Lisa reached out to the police again, urging them to investigate Mark's property. At first, the authorities hesitated. There was no direct evidence linking Mark to Emily, and they didn't want to jump to conclusions. But Lisa couldn't let go of the growing suspicion in her gut. Finally, after more pleading from Lisa and a few more subtle hints from concerned neighbors, the police obtained a warrant to search Mark's property. The investigation team arrived at Mark's house late one evening when the sun was setting and shadows stretched long across the yard. Inside, they found evidence that chilled them to the core. In his garage, they discovered several items hidden away, covered in dust and cobwebs. A large duffel bag, the same one described by the neighbor, was found tucked behind a stack of boxes. When they opened it, they found what appeared to be clothing, blankets, and a stack of old newspapers. But as they dug further, they found something far more disturbing: a series of photographs of Emily, carefully arranged in a manila folder. These weren't just candid pictures of her walking by or playing outside. They were taken from different angles, with some of them showing her in moments of deep concentration or when she was unaware of being watched. The photos were taken over several months, chronicling her every move. It was clear now that Mark's interest in Emily was far from innocent. The police immediately seized everything in the garage and began to search Mark's house. As they combed through the living room, they found more disturbing items: personal journals filled with rambling thoughts about Emily, his desire to be close to her, and delusions of a life together. Mark had been fantasizing about taking Emily away, of having her all to himself. When Mark returned home later that evening, the police were waiting for him. He tried to maintain his calm, but it was clear that he was shaken. He denied everything, but the evidence was undeniable. His obsession had grown to the point where he had carefully planned Emily's disappearance. In his mind, he had been doing what he believed was necessary to make her his. As the investigation unfolded, the town was rocked to its core. Emily's disappearance was no longer just a missing persons case. It was a nightmare that had been slowly building in the background, unnoticed by most. Mark Lawson, the quiet mechanic who had once been a mere neighbor, was now the center of a dark and twisted story. It wasn't until the third day of searching Mark's home that they found the most crucial evidence: a hidden room in the basement, one that had been concealed behind a false wall. Inside, to the horror of everyone, they found Emily. She was unconscious, but alive. The room was small, dimly lit by a single, flickering light bulb. There were no windows, just 4 bare walls. Emily's clothes were dirty, and she had clearly been held in that room for days. The emotional toll on her was evident in her pale face and the frailty of her body, but she was alive. The police rushed to her side, immediately providing medical care. The first thing Emily asked, once she regained consciousness, was, "Is my mom here?" When Lisa arrived at the scene, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. She ran to her daughter, her heart filled with relief and overwhelming love. Emily, though physically weak, managed a small smile. Her eyes, though tired, sparkled as they met her mother's gaze. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't get away." Lisa hugged her tightly, relieved that her daughter was back in her arms. Mark Lawson was arrested and charged with kidnapping, stalking, and numerous other crimes. His obsession with Emily had led him down a dark path, and now he would face the consequences. In the weeks that followed Emily's return, the town slowly began to heal from the shock. The story of what had happened spread quickly, and people were left grappling with the realization that someone they had once considered a harmless neighbor was capable of such horrors. Emily, however, refused to let the trauma define her. With the support of her family, friends, and a therapist, she began the difficult journey of healing. Though she had been through a traumatic experience, Emily's spirit remained unbroken. She was determined to continue pursuing her dreams, her love for music serving as a powerful outlet for her emotions. Emily's story became a testament to resilience, and in time, the small town embraced her once again. The talent show, which Emily had originally been preparing for, became a symbol of her strength. With her mother and brother by her side, she performed a song she had written during her recovery, a song that spoke of hope, survival, and the power of love. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Emily, but for the entire town. Though she would never forget the darkness that had briefly consumed her life, Emily learned to find light in the aftermath. Her story became an inspiration, reminding others of the importance of standing strong and finding the courage to rise, no matter what life throws their way. It was a bright spring morning, weeks after Emily's return, and the town had started to rebuild its sense of normalcy. The once eerie silence that had gripped the community began to fade as life crept back in. Emily had resumed school, and Lisa, though still haunted by the memories of those dark days, found peace in knowing her daughter was safe. But what no one knew was that the true horror was far from over. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lisa was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The smell of garlic and onions filled the air as she chopped vegetables, lost in thought. Emily had just returned home from a therapy session, and Mark Lawson's name had barely crossed anyone's mind. The arrest, the trial, it all seemed like a chapter that was now closed. Yet something in the back of Lisa's mind nagged at her, like a distant whisper she couldn't quite hear. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Hello," Lisa answered, wiping her hands on a towel. "Lisa, it's Detective Carter." The voice on the other end said, sharp and urgent, "I need you to come to the station. There's something you need to see." Her stomach churned. Something about the tone of his voice felt off, like a warning. "What is it? Is Emily—" No, the detective quickly reassured. "It's nothing like that. But it's important, Lisa. Please, just come as soon as you can." Without hesitation, Lisa dropped the towel, her heart pounding. She told Emily to stay home, assuring her that everything was fine, but the uneasy feeling in her gut only intensified as she drove to the police station. When Lisa arrived, she was ushered into a small, dimly lit room. Detective Carter sat across from her, his face grim, and beside him was a man she didn't recognize. "This is Agent Grant," the detective explained. "He's from a special task force investigating cases involving hidden networks and trafficking. What we're about to show you is not easy to hear, but you need to know. You need to know the truth." Lisa's blood ran cold. The words trafficking and networks had no place in her mind when it came to her daughter. She wanted to speak, to scream, but she couldn't. She was paralyzed by fear. Agent Grant slid a file across the table. It was thick, well-worn, and stamped with red, confidential markings. He opened it to reveal a series of photographs, pictures not of Emily, but of other girls. Young, blonde-haired girls, around the same age as Emily, all with similar faces. They had been taken in different locations, but the photos were eerily similar to the ones found in Mark's garage, ones that Lisa had seen before. The agent's words hit her like a slap. "We believe Mark Lawson wasn't acting alone. We found evidence linking him to a larger network, one that operates under the radar. The girls in the photos, they're all victims of a much broader operation. We've been investigating it for months, and Lawson was involved in a larger scheme." Lisa's mind couldn't grasp the implications of what the agent was saying. "What do you mean? Are you saying Mark wasn't just obsessed with Emily?" The detective nodded gravely. "Yes. He was one of the many spotters, people who target vulnerable children, get close to them, and then pass them along to a much more dangerous group." Lisa felt like the floor was falling out beneath her. The thought that Mark, the man who had been so close to her family, was part of something this sinister, something that had been operating in the background of their lives for so long, it was almost too much to bear. We were able to track down a few leads and discovered that Mark was only a small piece of this network. He had been sending pictures of Emily and others to an encrypted dark web channel. We don't have all the details yet, but we're connecting the dots. This network is much more widespread than we realized. Lisa's breath hitched as she remembered the strange, recurring feeling she had about Mark's behavior. The quiet, distant man she had once thought was just a lonely neighbor had been living a double life. He had been watching not only Emily, but other girls in the neighborhood, observing, learning their routines, and gathering information. But it wasn't just Emily. It was everyone. Mark had been targeting other children, and Lisa hadn't even known. The town had been under the radar of something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Mark is only one part of a larger operation, Agent Grant continued, but there's something else we discovered that you need to know. Lisa's heart stopped. What? We found evidence in Mark's computer. It's encrypted, but we're working on decoding it. However, there's one thing that's certain. The agent paused, looking her in the eye. Mark was planning to take Emily somewhere, to sell her. The whole thing was a setup. She was supposed to be his ticket out. Lisa's head spun. Mark had planned it all along. From the very moment he started watching Emily, he had been grooming her for something far darker. His obsession had only been a small part of a much larger, more terrifying plan. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, she knew. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Mark had been stalking not only Emily, but countless other girls. His quiet facade, his reclusiveness. It had all been a cover for a much darker purpose. He had been targeting her daughter all along. But then a new realization hit her. What if Emily hadn't been the only one to escape? Lisa's mind raced as she pieced together the chilling facts. She had assumed, like everyone else, that Mark was the only threat. But now, there was a horrifying possibility she hadn't even considered. The idea that Emily might have been marked for something much bigger than just a sick, twisted obsession. As the days passed, the investigation continued to unfold, and the truth grew even darker. Lisa learned that Mark's role was far from isolated. In fact, several other people in the town had been acting as spotters, like him. Unbeknownst to her, a hidden network of human traffickers had been operating under their noses for years, its members quietly blending in with the everyday fabric of life. But there was something else, something even more disturbing. Emily had been the lucky one, the one who had managed to escape. It was at the very last moment, the night Emily was taken, that she had narrowly avoided being moved to the next phase of the operation. It was her struggle, her instinct to fight back, that had bought her the time she needed to escape. But as Lisa stood outside the station, hearing all the details unfold, she realized the true twist of the story. Mark wasn't the mastermind. He had been another pawn in a much larger game. And as the investigation widened, it became clear. This wasn't just happening in their town. It was happening everywhere. The network was vast, reaching into every corner of the country. Lisa left the station with one final thought. Emily had escaped, but the nightmare wasn't over. The fight was just beginning. The last chilling words of Detective Carter echoed in her mind. The worst part, we don't know how deep this goes. There could be others, right under our noses. And as she drove home, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that the real horror was only just beginning.